Well, good morning, Maria.
Good morning, Kira Marie.
And where are you right now?
I'm on the Sunshine Coast.
And is it sunshine?
It's been raining here the last few days, probably for the week, but it's the sun's come out this morning, and I live like literally next to the beach, so I get to hear the ocean every morning.
That's why you're looking beautiful and brown. We too live right near the water, so it's not far down there. But my husband, he decided that he wanted to break his ankle and the ligament to come off the bone a little bit there. So last night it was a bit of an adventure. I took him out in my son's wheelchair down this steep hill and then into Manly, and the old wheelchair just wanted to veer off one side. But we had fun. It was a bit of an adventure, but we did it. And I'm not sure that I'll be doing that on a daily basis, but it was good fun. So welcome to the decision table. I decided that I had, look, Nikhil's got to be here. 2 beach bunnies. There we go. Yes. I've always thought of myself as a bunny. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Beach bunnies. Oh my gosh. Anyway, distracted. Welcome to the decision table. Like literally last year, I kept hearing this comment at the end of the year. 2020's really challenging year. I can't wait for 21 to happen. And it kind of got into my brain going, so many people just thought, oh my goodness, I'm going to wake up and it's going to be a beautiful new year, right? And nothing would actually change because they weren't going to do anything different. They were just going, new year, it's going to be different, right? And I thought, well, how can I make sure that I'm not one of those people, right, that think, oh, it's going to be a different year? Because I didn't really enjoy a lot of 2020. There was amazing things that did happen in 2020, but there were some things I don't want to repeat. So one of the things I thought was, hey, let's have a conversation every day in January on the decision table. And one of the lenses that I want to use as a theme this year is really seeing humanity. And for me, that means seeing humanity as stakeholders at the decision table. And part of that for me, if I break that down even further, is to actually look at what I believe is the need for a new approach to leadership. And so that's what these conversations really, very casual, as you saw even before we came on, extremely casual. And, really just having a conversation with different people every day so that I can start looking through different lenses. We become more aware when we do things like this, and we get different perspectives of what that may look like or need to look like. When you hear the need for a new approach, what does that bring up inside of you straight away?
Look, 2020 was an entire year of a need of a different approach. And I think for me, a different approach, to me, what that means is adaptability and flexibility. So whether that be someone requiring new resources or changing the way that they approach things, whether that be with their thinking or as a skill set, I think for me, for that specifically, it's all about adaptability and changing the way you look at things, to look at things from different perspectives, just rather than from the one space that you've been looking at it for the whole year, let's say.
Yeah. Thank you, Vinka, for joining us all the way from Germany, I think it is. I'm going to find out. I think she's coming on, might be even tomorrow. So I will get to know exactly where she is in the world. But yeah, look, I think adaptability, let's talk about that a little bit more. What does that look like for you, or has looked like for you in your own world?
Yeah. The way that I see it is that adaptability can be where someone approaches an obstacle and a challenge and asking themselves, how can they do this differently, or can they achieve the result in a different way? Really being connected with yourself and how you're responding to each individual situation and how you can approach it quite differently. Because the way that one person may perceive a certain situation is perceived very differently from another. So having that change of approach, let's say, allows someone to be highly adaptable and flexible. And I think with everything that had happened last year and still going on, across Australia, is still having that way of thinking to know how to change in how you actually approach different situations, because the way you may have been doing things previously is not the same way you would do things potentially, last year or even this year again.
Yeah. But you see, that sounds really good. And I love it, right? Adaptability. But we are in really unpredictable times and many times of uncertainty. So how do we do leadership or whatever we're doing in our own world better and be able to actually use this as a lens in which we start bringing change?
Yeah, sure. So how do we do leadership better? It's really understanding self first in knowing how to lead others, forward. If someone is not really having a clear understanding in who they are, how they're responding, how they're thinking, how they're overcoming obstacles and challenges, how would they know how to lead others in being able to overcome those same obstacles and challenges? We live in a world of uncertainty, and I think the last 12 months of 2020, even going into 2021, is really knowing how to embrace uncertainty and how to take steps forward as a leader in leadership in that, that space of uncertainty, to be able to create that safe environment for others that they're taking forward.
So tell me, how's this played out in your own personal life?
Uncertainty?
Any of it? Adaptability, uncertainty?
Last year for me personally was a great year. I actually moved state before 2020 had occurred. So I had come into a space where moving state, not knowing anyone, growing a business from a new place was in a place of uncertainty for me. So having all what had happened with the pandemic and everything and the shift in the economy pushed me forward to be able to be more adaptable and create new things within my business that I had never thought I had created before. So we hear this thing across the business world last year about, pivoting your business and going in all different directions. And I think pivoting is great, but when you actually don't go with one particular way of doing things, it can create a lot of confusion and increase that uncertainty in how someone is to approach something. So for me, I found one way and I stuck with it for the whole of 2020. And my business was quite successful last year, especially in what I specifically do. And now 2021 is another year, and thinking and looking at a different approach, how to approach this next 12 months with a different way of thinking moving forward. So that's how I've been able to move forward over the last 12 months.
So what are you thinking in, the next 12 months? How do you think, we need to play out adaptability in what we're doing?
Yeah. I think that for me, moving forward, like I run a lot of live trainings, so they're all face-to-face, and with Brisbane and New South Wales that have just gone in lockdown and so forth, I've had to make some changes. I had a plan in place for the next 12 months, and I've had to make some changes. And what I found is that a lot of people get caught up emotionally because of the lack of clarity and direction as they're going. But I think for me, it's about chunking this year down into smaller chunks and looking at what can you do each month moving forward, rather than looking at it over a 12-month period, which can get overwhelming for some. So I think looking at smaller pieces of the puzzle will allow someone to be able to manage the direction in where they're going forward within their business, but also helping, foreseeing what can potentially happen if they're running a team, to know how to be able to address those obstacles and challenges moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And actually that's come up a few times, the whole chunking it down into smaller bite size. And I think it's way easier also to adapt or to be flexible when you can do those shifts, just those little tiny shifts rather than the big, huge ones.
Absolutely.
And always a good thing when you have that flexibility. It's one of the things I really do teach, is that I believe that we need to be building these ecosystems rather than just this is the business model, because of this reason, that I think that there are times when you don't need to go down that pathway or cannot go down that pathway, but you've got other pathways to choose from. And I think having those bite size is one of the ways in which we can do that. So love that. How do you like, if you're thinking in 5 years time, do you think in 5 years time, 10 years time, are you, I love to play in a big space, and I love to think much bigger than where I'm at right now, or otherwise that would kill me to death if that's all I'm doing right now. And are you thinking that way at all, or?
Yeah, look, I have big goals. I have, 5-10 year goals, and where I want to head. And I have that big picture in the back of my mind, but I also focus on what I'm doing right now to be able to move forward towards that big picture. Especially like January now, we're in a time where people are setting goals, moving forward.
That's why I thought it would be a great question to ask. Right?
So, and I'm doing a group training at the moment, a webinar training for magnetizing profit for business owners. And one of those things are for to set goals, and some of them either have no vision and clarity of what that bigger picture looks like, and they're so caught up in the number crunches of what's happening in the next 3 months. So it's a matter of getting that person to look at the bigger picture. And then there's some that are so looking too far ahead that they're not taking enough action in the now to create what they want. So setting goals and where you're heading is a bit of there's a balance between the two. You've got to, have that big picture, but also know what you're actually doing in that small chunk to know how to be able to get there and pave that path in moving forward to that bigger picture.
Yeah. Are there some indicators you're going to be looking for, or you use as your sort of indicators to help make better decisions and pathways ahead, even in uncertain times?
Yeah, absolutely. Critical thinking is number one, because where one critically thinks about something, they're not responding and reacting emotionally. And when a person is not aware of their thinking or how they're responding, decision-making can be impinged upon when they're responding, either when they're angry or they're sad or they're anxious or they're, whatever emotion that might be. So in business specifically, being able to remove that emotional trigger will allow someone to be able to make a congruent decision that is, empowering not only for themselves but also for the business itself. And that can go with anyone. It's even outside of the business world. There's a lot of people that have had to either close their businesses or they're working from home, so they've got a change of environment that they're in at the moment. So knowing how to be able to create outcomes would require critical thinking in knowing how to do so.
Yeah. So give us an example or a strategy in which we can make, think better.
Yeah. One of the tools that I give my clients is if they're in a moment where they're responding emotionally, they're getting caught up in their own emotions, is to visually dissociate themselves from when they're actually in it. So see themselves sitting or standing wherever they are, like objectively. And what that does is when someone looks at themselves objectively, like visualizing that process, it removes the emotional charge from that specific situation. You can use this in business, you can use this in relationships, you can use it in any contextual area. So all I get my clients to do is to close their eyes and see themselves, looking at themselves in the picture and waiting for that emotional charge to dissipate. And that will allow them to think about things from a critical space rather than thinking it from emotionally.
Yeah, I love that. One of the very first things that I did was write this magazine, just a really basic one. And it was the 10 leadership lessons that I learned from having autistic children. And honestly, one of them in particular has been a strategy or technique I have used throughout my work, my own life. And that is this, that, you know, those that are on a spectrum that have autism, when they make a decision, they just want a particular outcome, a result, right? And they don't have emotion involved in that decision. They just are going, I am going for that. And I'm not looking left or right, which, by the way, can cause a lot of grief at times. But in the other way of it, which was so fascinating, was watching the power of not having the emotion in it. And so I always took that in, and it's been one of the most strongest and powerful things that I've used with clients is removing that emotion out of it. And you know, one example was my son, and he always, as a young little kid, he always wanted to have the Xbox before we got in the car, and he could not. And so he's got autism, and so he could not get in that car until he had the Xbox. And one day I said to my family, we are not getting in that car until we have got him in the car and he's not getting the Xbox, because I just wanted to see what I could, you know, as a family, as a collective, see how far and how, if we could shift, you know, the whole decision making on that. Do you know what? 4.5 hours later, we gave up. We had exhausted everything, and we just wanted to get in that car. And all we had to do was give him literally 3 minutes on there, because that had been the decision that he had made, and there was no emotion in it, but he was not moving from that until then. And I just thought, wow, there is so much power when you are that focused and you won't let anything. And we threw everything, bribes, you name it. We tried everything to get him, and he would not waver. And I thought, wow, imagine if we were like that, if we were so determined that we wanted that outcome, no matter what challenges were thrown at us, no matter what other successful things looked that way, shiny objects, and we just did that. And that has been a really powerful tool to use and continue to use in my work. And here's the tricky thing. The other day I had an amazing conversation on the decision table with a fantastic woman doing some work with addictions in Arizona. And this is huge things, you know, like years of probably, if not, and we had that conversation, you know, has it come down from generations? Is it environmental challenges that have set it off and things like that? There is a lot of emotion in that. So I get it when there's people who can choose not to have emotion in it. But what about the ones that are not at that point yet, maybe want to be at that point, but haven't got to that point? What would you say around that?
Just to clarify, on emotions, what I'm specifically talking about is someone that feels negative emotions. If someone feels positive emotions and it's empowering, it empowers them to make a decision. So I just wanted to clarify that.
In that case, I would be saying it can be used as a driver, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, with your son who's autistic, how you said he just goes for it and just makes the decision, that's a really great example in how someone can remove the actual negative emotions, but they've got the drive to move forward, the motivation to move forward. And, you know, the average person who does make decisions like that will feel good about it. They have that gut feeling that they know that it's right and it feels good, and that's an empowering decision when a person makes a decision. So I think for the average person that does experience these emotions, it's a matter of you mentioned about what happens to us in our families and so forth, and a lot of it comes from programming from our parents, our environments as we grow up, and that has an influence in how we actually go about making decisions and how we respond and how we think and so forth. So I think the biggest thing someone can do is really understanding who they are and how they think, to know how to change how they can respond and how they're thinking. And a great exercise that I suggest to people is to do journaling, because it allows someone to put a pen to paper and really discover more things about who they are and where they can make changes within themselves to improve their own performance and making better quality decisions moving forward.
So if we pull this back into the lens of the need for a new approach to leadership, and we're looking through the lens of going, hey, if we are better, then that's going to have that ripple effect, the domino effect. How do we do that? What are some of the areas in which has been kind of old school leadership thinking, and we can do the new improved sort of version of it?
Yeah, amazing. So what a person can do in a leadership position is understand what limitations they're running themselves, because what happens is most people will lead and project based on their own limitations, and then people will respond and trigger those limitations, and then it creates conflict within a leadership group. So understanding what limitations the person has and addressing those, and then knowing each individual who they're leading as an individual and how to communicate to each individual person in a way that connects to them and empowers them to move forward. A leader isn't about just telling people what they do. It's about empowering the individual to move forward on their own accord and to take action, and to essentially for them to rise up and become a leader, and help another group of people moving forward as well.
But you mentioned something that I've brought up so many times. I believe that old school leadership is very much the telling leadership, that it was like you had 3 principles, and if you put these 3 principles into place, then it is going to be all merry and you're going to be the most fantastic ever leader, and we'll all live happily ever after. And I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a few global challenges, economic, social, environmental. And so I'm thinking some of the leadership isn't working, and some of that isn't going to keep working going forward. So it's easy to keep doing what we know. It's not so easy to want to shift, gears and do something that is unknown and to change. There's a lot of things that we know works to a degree. And so it's almost, even though we know in a lot of cases, there's an awareness around the need for change, or the thought that maybe some change could help, or we need to see something happen. But then it gets back to the point, well, my default system goes back to what I know, which is actually not necessarily the best thing. Do I don't know if you're seeing that, but I know that I get to see a lot of people defaulting back to what they know rather than wanting to even start creating an awareness around what could be part of that change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that came up is people's values shift during different times, and the biggest thing that can influence someone's values is the environment. And what happens is you mentioned how people regress back, right? What happens is when people have moved forward and they've created change within themselves, but under stress, when the environment puts them under stress, they actually regress backwards to the last level of thinking that they've been operating, which is what their default mode
Yes.
is. And we've seen this across the world where people will start to awaken and then they start to push back. But the push back in some individuals can be quite aggressive, quite violent, and quite forceful. Whereas if we look at how are they leading and empowering other people to take action that can help others as well? Or are they just creating more conflict and more aggression? And how is that contributing to the world at the moment?
Yeah. No, I like that. You say an interesting thing. You said the biggest. Tell me more about that. Why do you see it as the biggest? I think there's many variables. Why do you say biggest? For what was it we were just saying? My brain just went lost on that because I was like, that was kind of like a moment where I go, okay, do I agree? Do I not? I'm not sure because I'm not sure where you're coming from on that one, right? And that was, so tell me about that.
Yeah, so we were talking about values.
Yes.
Okay. And what happens is, let me give you an example, right?
Oh, the environment being the biggest.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I have a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
The values is what's inside the container, right? And that's what people are thinking. That's what they're operating. The cup itself is the person itself. And the outside is the environment. People go through life. If the environment stays the same, the coffee will stay the same temperature, the same, consistency the entire time. But let's say something happens in the world, like a pandemic, and I put the cup in the freezer.
Yes.
What happens to the content inside the actual container itself?
It changes.
It freezes. It's the same content, right? But it's changed because of the environment. So what's happened now is that there's been a massive global shift in the environment for each individual being the container, and it's created a change in the values, what they classify what's most important to them, which is now what they're doing in taking action and what's motivating them and what's causing them to make decisions, because there's been a change of the environment. It's not the person itself, it's the environment that influences what's happening inside the person's head.
Okay, so what if I change massively, but my environment doesn't?
Does the environment support the person that's changed?
Well, in some cases, no, right? Because people stay in the same environment, but they change. What makes it harder is if they have changed so dramatically or drastically compared to their environment, then it makes it difficult, right? It makes it difficult because, it might be a harder journey to keep doing what they're meant to be doing or feel like that's important to them now or their values. And that's why often if you stay in the same environment, it will, you can often default back to how you operated last. But that doesn't mean that you definitely do, because I have seen many that have stayed in environments and it's amazing what they've achieved or where they've gone to, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if a person stays in their environment and the environment doesn't support the change, either the person will change the environment that they're in to make sure that it does support them, or they end up leaving that environment to create a new environment that supports them as an individual. So that's what happens if you were to stay in that specific environment. So the environment must support the person in doing those behaviors. If it doesn't, they'll regress back to what they were previously doing to be able to adapt to that specific environment.
I always talk about curating moments in environments, right? Like that to me is such an important part of being able to make, and part of what I think is the need for a new approach is this focus, using that as a lens. How will you do that going forward? Like, how are you going to be curating a better environment for you to be a better leader?
Okay, curating a better environment to be a better leader. What I've been focusing on is what I'm doing myself and what's happening in my environment and how I'm responding to those particular things, how I'm creating and connecting with each individual person. Because the person that say, for example, I've connected with previously may have a different hat on in how they're thinking and responding in the now, because there's been a lot of changes that has happening. So it's not about what am I doing? It's about how am I connecting and communicating to that individual to be able to maintain and keep those relationships going, because each person changes over time, especially with, what's happened over the last 12 months. So communication is key. You communicate to how the other person likes to be communicated, not how you like to be communicated, in order, especially as a leader, right? If you're leading a team, leading people, it's about them. It's not about you. So, and that's how I see moving forward. And I see that a lot in my trainings when I've got students that come in and they're wanting to create change, they're wanting to grow their businesses, and it's about them and how I can support them as an individual in getting them to where they want to be in their outcome. And that's with anyone. Like when you go to networking, when you speak to the person at the coffee shop, how can you contribute into their world, their model of the world, and leave a positive imprint on them so as they can go move forward and do the same for others as well. And I think that's, for me, that's about creating a global impact without necessarily doing huge changes to that specific person.
Okay, talk to me more about that. What do you mean by a global impact?
Well, global impact is helping, empowering others to make empowering decisions. So whether that be speaking to the person at the coffee shop and talking to them about who they are, what their business is, or what they did on the weekend. And for me, I'm all about, NLP. So it's about neuro-linguistic programming. So it's about language and how to use linguistics to be able to empower the individual. So they may have not have thought about something previously that they've thought about by being able to contribute in a way that widens their scope of thinking. For me, that's about creating impact on the planet. I know that I've created a small amount of change that's big enough for them to go out and actually do something differently that can potentially empower someone else.
Yeah, I love that. By the way, I'm all into the global impact. Absolutely. It's a huge part of my world. Interesting enough, though, like a lot of people want to make impact. And I think it goes back to what you earlier said around making it, as I said before, like there's a lot of global, if we look at on the global stage of problems, there's like, the where the world is at economically right now with what has happened across the world, where the environment, what the pressures we're putting on it to what is actually needed as output kind of thing. What's another one? The social, like the fact that all of a sudden we're being isolated in our own little bubbles, and we're not being pushed out into maybe different thinkings and benefits of being involved in different cultures alone, just as some little filters and things like that. Here's the thing. Often people think, well, that's now getting bigger and bigger, and the gap from problem to solution is actually widening. And I think it goes back to what you earlier said, that we have to keep shifting things forward, but just where it was kind of, you could make bigger leaps at some stages now to keep impacting, not just in your own little individual world, but across the globe. It's actually, those have become smaller increments. We can still shift it forward, but I think that part of what we need to look at is going, how can we just keep shifting it forward? And part of that is these kind of conversations where I believe that we're not always going to agree at the table, and it's uncomfortable. And if we are to have different distinctions, I call it, not diversity at the table, then for us to bring distinctions to the table, we have to be more comfortable to be uncomfortable. Absolutely. How do you see this? How do you see this playing out more in the work that you're doing this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you said, bring diversity to the table, because it's better to have a table of different people than to have a
Yeah.
table of all the same way of thinking, because you're going to be stuck in the same place the entire time, because there's only one way of thinking. And I think, moving forward is about how can I look at things differently, approach things differently, having that flexibility and adaptability, as I mentioned earlier, and moving forward, knowing how to be able to have options, create options for oneself in how they can actually approach things differently. One of the things that I've noticed is people will move forward, especially last year, with one specific way. But what happens if that doesn't work out? What are you going to do differently? How else are you going to approach things differently? Because sometimes there's no one straight line to get to that outcome. You may have to deviate and have certain things that has to play in order to create that change or to create that outcome. So asking yourself, what other options, what would happen if that wasn't to happen? So flexibility is key, but not just as an individual in terms of thinking and how someone can approach a specific outcome. I think that is the biggest thing someone can get out of what has happened over the last 12 months with the pandemic is there's always going to be uncertainty, but it's about how you actually approach it with confidence and with certainty within yourself, knowing that you can create an outcome and a solution, even though the perception of uncertainty is occurring at the moment.
So what about you? How do you cope when everyone thinks really differently? Because you're pretty certain on the way that you think. You've got strategies that have worked well for you. You know it works for your clients. What if you were coming to the table and everyone was having very, very different conversations? How do you manage that, work with it rather than against it? Have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Conversations, everyone has a specific outcome, but the highest intention or the highest purpose of what each individual wants, what you would find is if you chunk high enough, everyone wants the same thing. Everyone wants the same outcome. It's just a matter of knowing what that is and how to communicate that effectively. Excuse me. So by having those open conversations with each individual and actively listening in terms of what they want and what they want to achieve, but asking them, okay, well, what's the highest intention or the purpose of you wanting that? And then they'll tell you. And it could be, at the moment to be able to create, certainty in leadership, let's say. But each individual perceives the outcome very differently, and they may language it in a way that, that sounds different. So knowing what on the table, what's the highest intention of what everyone wants allows you to come to a bigger conclusion where everyone can agree moving forward.
Yeah, so I find that interesting and fascinating because I totally agree with you when there's a smaller table. I think of something that I put on last year, and that was called the Global Human Intelligence Forum. And, we had over 70 leaders coming in and out throughout the 3 days. And from across the globe with many different values, many different beliefs, many different thinkings, and at different stages in their lives as well. And it was at the most pivotal time of racial tension across the globe, where many didn't want to be saying things because they were afraid of what was to be said or not said. So in the smaller group, I agree with you in the way that you're saying that. In the bigger group, what was powerful about the Global Human Intelligence Forum, and someone said this to me the other day, was that the openness of the conversation, right from those that keynoted to then I had conversations just like we're doing now with that keynoter, and then we opened it up as an open forum to have conversation, and anyone could ask anything. And in that case, you don't know what's going to be said, where they're coming from with that question, whatever it is. It was the most beautiful 3 days of my life, I have to say, and everyone knew that it was a no judgment zone. Now, one of the things someone said to me the other day was, most of those people were people that have been in my world that I love and adore from so many walks of life. There were others in there, of course, that were sold into it, that came, that I didn't know. But if we are to open it to these open forums, right, where it is about a bigger group, understanding where people are coming from right from the get-go is really difficult, because we want to give them voices and we want to be more open in that. And so, yeah, what do you think when you hear something like this?
Yeah, sure. So, with what you just explained in terms of an open forum where there's a big group of people, or even, much bigger than that, I think the one thing that people seek in order to freely speak about what they're thinking and how they're feeling is creating an environment they're going to feel safe to be able to share. And knowing that each individual may listen to them or may not, but will respect their perspective and their point of view and how they view, what's happening in their world. So by being able to just simply actively listen to what they're saying and maybe ask questions about why is that important to you, or how do you see things moving, differently, to understand how they think, because each person's perception is very different to everyone else. There's no one that has the same perception in how they view things. So I think the key here is respecting what they're saying, but also asking more questions to find out how they're thinking, in order to get more clarity in how they've made that conclusion of what they've said.
How do you listen better?
Yep. So I ask questions because I want more information, because then I understand how they're thinking, what's important to them, and also what drives them, what's their motivators. So active listening for me is simply just listening to the person explain how they're feeling, and then asking them, how is that important to you, or what would happen if you did this? Instead of intervening with a conversation, I always simply ask questions to be able to get more information.
What if you really hated what was being said at the table?
Yeah.
Well, this is reality, right? This conversation is real and raw, because these are the things that I think it's easy to know these concepts, to live them, to do them, and to change it as a new approach to leadership. It's a whole different ball game. And so this is why I go, well, if you really hated what was being said at that table and you needed to listen, what does that look like for you?
For me, it would be, okay, I don't agree, but I'm just going to listen. I'm going to respect that person's view. I'm going to allow them to speak, because at the moment, people are being suppressed in not being able to express what they think and how they feel, and not that this is what's causing a lot of kickback in society, especially having to wear masks and all of this stuff. So by respecting that space and allowing them to have that at that time, even though I may not agree, the only question I would ask that person is, what is the highest intention of you, or the purpose of you having this? And what that does, it chunks higher from where they're bogged down into all the detail, to really understand what is the initial driver that's causing them to wanting to have that perception. So for example, if it's, vaccines, this is one of the things that it's been spoken about, in society at the moment. Some people are for the vaccine, some people are against, and there are, and you want to know what is the highest intention for them getting the vaccine or not getting the vaccine. And it may be to be able to create, a healthier planet, or to prevent illness, and it may be the same for both parties. But understanding that each person has their own judgment in what they want, and respecting that for that time and allowing them to be able to speak will create a place where people can feel safe and open to share their perspective without any sort of aggression or kickback from anyone else.
Yeah. So do you see anything stopping others being able to do that? Because if I think of that, one of the things that I would see that potentially could be a stopper is if I associate with those sort of people at my table, then people are going to think I do agree with them, or that that's the way I do it. And I don't want to be known for that.
So if you associate with people that disagree with you,
well, maybe they're into, and I had this conversation with someone else. By the way, this is not the way I think, but it brought it up, and I was so shocked by it, but I understood it. And that was, they said, but I don't want people like that at my table, literally, because if they are, then people are going to think that I believe that, or that what they're into is what I'm into. And I thought that was a really interesting thinking.
Well, let me ask you this. How do you know?
How do you know? What do you mean by that question?
How would this person know that other people would perceive them that way? And if they did?
Yeah, so it's a perceived thought that they're thinking.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah. So, like I said to you, it's better to have like you said earlier, better to have a diverse table than to have a table of everyone that thinks the same.
And I totally agree. And I'd like to add that this has not been the norm in the past, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So again, how do we shift this to going, hey, this is not just okay, this is so much more value, benefit, etc., etc.
To be able to clearly articulate that we're actually allowing different perspectives to come together to create a bigger picture in knowing how to move forward. So diversity on a table, absolutely. And also being true to oneself in what their beliefs are. So if someone sits at a table and they're disagreeing and they're with other people that disagree with them, they know what they believe, they know what their values are, they know what they want, but they're also open to what other people think and also curious in how they're thinking. I think curiosity is the biggest thing that you can have on a table with diversity, because we always want to understand how people are thinking and what's causing them to think that way, whether they agree with you or not. But it's about creating a space of no judgment, respect, and allowing them to freely speak how they're feeling, but also being curious as to how they're actually thinking that way.
And by the way, that was one of the things that came out of our conversation really strongly a few days ago. And we said that is part of the need for a new approach, is to have curiosity conversations. Yeah. And so I love that you brought that point back up again. So good. Okay, so here's the thing, though. I believe that there's a few fundamentals to leadership to use as lenses. And part of that is leadership awareness, which we've spoken around. Leadership ownership. So, once you've become aware of what it is, because we don't know what we don't know, but when we do, I believe there's this need for us to take responsibility. Own, what does that look like for me? What am I going to take with that? What am I going to roll with that? And then that brings the change, and then looking through always through sustainability. In other words, not just this generation, but the generations and the generations to come, right? From our conversation today, what is it that you've taken or thought about or going to do differently? Just one thing or that you've got from this conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. I've loved it all today. The one thing that really stood out for me is diversity at the table. So I really loved our discussion around that. But obviously I look at it from a business context, but you've brought it into my awareness in terms of a global perspective, and how to be able to step into that for 2021 being another year of what's happening on the planet at the moment. So I think for me, it's not about what's happening in the now, it's about what's happening in the actual world right now that we can contribute and create change rather than, in our community, or even though we can create these small increments of, change, but how is that impacting on a global scale?
Yeah, I love that. Okay, and if someone wants to come along on that journey on how you're impacting across the globe and in your own individual and with your world, how do they get best hold of you?
Yeah, sure. So they can connect with me on Facebook, which is Maria Van Vuklis, or The Conscious CEO, or they can jump onto my website, which is mariavanvuklis.com, and have a look through there and book a call with me and so forth.
I love that. So my one thing that I've got from this conversation is the reminder of the emotional decisions. And I think it's something I used to be very, very intentional, and it's just kind of part of my decision DNA, but I want to bring it more into my work today, going, what am I still bringing emotion into some of the decisions that I'm making today? And what do I need to leave behind with that emotion, and use the emotion that I have to keep driving? I mean, I live by drivers. I believe every vision, every initiative I have, I do a pattern around it called the Decision DNA Culture Pattern. And so literally every initiative, every company, every enterprise I do, it has 4 drivers that drive those 4 pillars that hold that vision. So, it's a huge part of what my work is. So, but I think it's always good to keep going back to that and understanding, hey, was I a bit more emotional when I was trying to think that way, or is this not working this way because there's too much emotion involved in it? So I'm loving that piece, to reminder of that, and the power of how we make our decisions in that way. Is there anything else that you really want to leave people with when it comes to the new approach to leadership, or thoughts around that?
Yeah, sure. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is key. Knowing what you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself, would also determine what behaviors you're actually producing. So self-awareness is key. Know yourself first in order to be able to help other people and lead them moving forward.
Yeah. So give us a strategy or a few things around how we can do that better.
Yeah, sure. So if you get caught up in negative self-talk, if you're finding yourself beating yourself up or feeling, a certain emotion, ask yourself, okay, what am I saying to myself right now that's causing me to feel this way? Because the biggest conversations that we have are the conversations that we have with ourselves. And in order to change how we're behaving is to change the conversations that we're having with ourselves. And exercise to do that is to just write down what you're thinking, what you're saying to yourself. So get it pen to paper, to get it out of your head. And then ask yourself, okay, what can I say to myself differently that's more empowering for me to create different behaviors moving forward?
Love that. What about you? Do you ever have that voice of doubt, or have you got this all sorted and nailed?
Well, we're all human, so
good. I know, that's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to know if there was a sister out there that has to deal with this too. I just think, I love that, and I also want people to realize that at every level, I believe there's this need to stretch to a different capacity. And sometimes that means that where I used to be able to, make a decision that way and create this awareness and be really confident in it, I might have to learn to do that even more. And so there might be the need to do what you just said even more, right? Or again, to just, sometimes I get out in those moments, I'll get out my pattern and I'll look at it and I go, yeah, but this is not about me. This is about all the lives that get changed because I'm willing to step up today and do this. Or this is actually going to help change patterns of where we see these problems occurring and distraction is happening and devastation. But if I get to do this and help others to be able to work these patterns out, guess what? That's not going to happen at the same level that it would have if I don't do this. And I think, just a full circle, there's some of these drivers are just so important. And, it's not just, hey, we need this need for a new approach to leadership in a greater field, but it comes back to us being able to go, how can we be better leaders as well? And what does that look like so that we can then give out of much greater and more effective leadership, right? So thank you for coming on here and being a part of this and just willing to have a conversation, because I have heard about you. I have not actually had a conversation before with you, so I was learning more about you as we had this conversation, your thinking. I can see you have very very particular ways in which you move people forward, and so great frameworks in doing that that really help to I'm all into a framework because it gives you something to work within so that you can then give out more of. And I think that that's just fascinating. You and I both love patterns and the whole wiring around the brain and the neuro. It fascinates me. And so I'm always interested to ask questions to someone who works in a field that's part of it. So thank you for your willingness to step up and to come in and be a part of this today, and not really even know what this platform, let alone really what you were going to be hit with today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you to all the listeners. And if you've loved this talk and this conversation today, and you want to know more, well, you know how to get hold of Maria. You know how to reach out to me, reach out in the comments, reach out, whatever. But the biggest thing, I think, is that you share these. If we are to have different conversations, if we are to have a new approach to leadership, the more people have an awareness or create an awareness, the more we can have the right conversations and the right people and those at the tables. I call it distinctions because I think diversity actually brings division. So if we can look through the lens of humanity as stakeholders at the table, and that's the one thing we have in common at the table, but we bring our distinctions to the table. And I think that the more we can do that, the more we can bring many, many different people with many different distinctions, like yourself, Maria, bringing what you brought to the table today, the more we are likely to be able to really work towards shifting it from problem to solution across the world. Nikhil did have, do you have a framework for creating frameworks? Of course, you would have to say that, Nikhil. Do you want to answer that, Maria, before we leave? Do you have a framework for creating frameworks?
A framework for creating frameworks. I think
that was very meta.
It would have to be creating a roadmap. A roadmap is like a framework. You've got to create step by step, like a scaffold. It takes one piece at a time. So being able to firstly establish what each piece is within that framework or that scaffold or that path to be able to create a complete framework. The only way you can know if a framework works is if you actually test it. And if it does work, then you go ahead with it. If not, you make changes, modify it, and then constantly refine that framework until you actually achieve a sustainable result.
Perfect. There you go, Nikhil. That was Maria's answer. And mine is, of course, I have a framework about a framework. And that is very much how I create leadership solution pathways and patterns that create these ecosystems with all these pathways, which are really cool and fun. So, but that is for another talk. Another conversation.
Fantastic.
I am going to end this broadcast. So thank you so much for being a part of the decision table and being here today.
Thank you.